Kurouzu Hospital is in an uproar. Bloodthirsty pregnant women and creepy babies are surrounding Kirie, and her life is in danger. Welcome to the world of Uzumaki Spiral into Horror. This is episode 3, and I got some good news and some bad news when it comes to this episode. The good news is that the animation quality has improved. So episode 1 was phenomenal, episode 2 had a regress in animation quality, and episode 3 is a lot better. Not as great as episode 1, but better than episode 2. The bad news is that the pacing is all over the place. Episode 1 covered chapter 1, half of chapter 2, and chapter 3. Episode 2 covered multiple chapters. I'm not going to list them all, but we had more than just the 3 chapters that the first one covered. And episode 3 covers 8 chapters. Some of them we've already covered before and we're just circling back and finishing them. Yeah, the chapters that we are going to be covering is chapter 2, the Spiral Obsession Part 2. So we had half of this in episode 1 and now we're going to have the other half in episode 3. The Firing Effect, chapter 4. This was a chapter that was skipped for some reason and now we're coming back to it. And I'll explain why this is a terrible idea as we go through the breakdown. Then we're going to go with chapter 6, Medusa, which is a chapter we've already covered. We're just going to basically be snipping the very end of this chapter gets put into this episode, as well as chapter 7, Jack in the Box. Jack in the Box got mostly covered. Well, half of it got covered in the last episode, and now we're covering just the ending in this episode. And it comes just out of nowhere. Once again, I'll explain why this is a terrible idea once we get to that point. The next completely new chapter that we're covering, other than the firing pin, is chapter 10, Mosquitoes. Chapter 11, The Umbilical Cord. Chapter 12, The Storm. And chapter 13, The House. Those are the chapters that are going to be covered in this episode. So, yeah, there's been a lot of issues in regard to the makings of this series. I'll cover a little bit more of that after we're done with the episode breakdown. So let's just jump right into the episode breakdown. So we start off at the hospital where Kirie is basically being looked after because of the lighthouse incident in the last issue. Kirie, well, she's supposed to suffer some burns, but doesn't really look like she has any burns. Mostly just looks like she, broke her leg and an arm and stuff, and she has like a small bruise on her face. And her boyfriend Shuichi is visiting her, but he's also visiting his mom. And this is where we kind of circle back to chapter 2, where Shuichi is scared that his mom is going to discover the spiral in her ear. Basically, inside all of her ears, there's a small spiral. And since mom is freaking out about spirals, he believes that if she knows about the spiral in her ear, she's going to do something dangerous. She's already cut off her hair because she doesn't want her hair to spiral. She's already snipped off the ends of her fingertips because her fingerprints have spirals in them. So what do you think she's going to do when she discovers that there's spirals in her ear? Shuichi notices that as she's talking to the doctor, there's a chart that has like the different anatomies, and one of them has an anatomy of the ear, which showcases a spiral. He starts freaking out, like he doesn't want his mom to notice this. And so he's talking to Kirie later on about this, and they notice that there's a bunch of mosquitoes outside. Shuichi explains that mosquitoes, the males swarm in spirals, and that the females are the ones that go and suck blood, and they suck blood to provide for the babies within the eggs that they're carrying. Going to play a part later on, so keep that in mind. And then we have a nurse basically telling Kirie that because of the way the hospital is, she's going to have to share a room with someone, and it turns out the person she's sharing her room with is Keiko. And Keiko happens to be Kirie's cousin, and she also happens to be pregnant. And it looks like she's covered in a bunch of mosquito bites. Kirie is putting items away for Keiko, and one of them is this weird metallic object that Kirie points out. She's like, what is this? It's kind of heavy. Keiko's like, oh, don't worry about it. Just put it inside the cabinet with the rest of my things. And then that's when we have a random moment where we have Kirie's dad inside the dragonfly pond, and he's scooping up water. And basically he's going to be using the water for the clay that he makes to make his pottery. And for anyone who doesn't remember about this pond, when Mr. Saito was dead and cremated and his ashes went up into the sky and created the spiral went down into the pond, and everyone kind of noticed that. And that was one of the reasons why Saito freaked out, as well as just seeing her husband's face in the sky. So yeah, Kirie's dad decides, hey, might be a good idea to continue using this water. And then that's when we have the nurses discover the next morning that there are patients that are dead. And basically they're covered in mosquito bites and they're all drained of blood. They have no blood in their body, and they have no idea what's going on, and they believe that there's a murderer somewhere loose in the hospital. But they don't do anything about it. That's when Shuichi comes in to meet up with his girlfriend again, and he notices a mosquito flying around, and he pulls out bug spray and he starts spraying the mosquito until he kills it. But the spray starts causing Keiko to cough. So a nurse comes in and shoves Shuichi out and tells him to leave, and Kirie opens up the window so that Keiko can get some fresh air. And then later that night, Kirie hears some buzzing, so she wakes up and she looks out into the hallway, and she sees all the pregnant women are walking down the hallway. They're all covered in mosquito bites. They all have this weird look on their face, and they're all carrying the same metallic object that Kirie had stored away for Keiko. And so she notices that all the pregnant women start going into different rooms. And so she walks into one of the rooms that she saw one of the pregnant women go into, and she sees a patient laying passed out as a pregnant woman is using the object to drill a hole in his neck and then sucking the blood out of him. So it turns out that the murderers are the pregnant women, and they're going around murdering the other patients and sucking out their blood. Kind of like mosquitoes. And so this woman notices Kirie and attacks her. And that's when we have another patient step out, and he notices, and he's like, hey, what the hell is going on here? And then more pregnant women show up, and they start stabbing him and drinking his blood. And then that's when they notice Kirie again. So they go to make a move on Kirie, and another nurse comes out and is wondering what's going on. And they go and they attack the nurse and murder her. So yeah, we're just getting people getting killed left and right by these pregnant women. And so they chase Kirie, who runs back into her room, and she's trying to shut the door. She's asking Keiko for help. Keiko comes up behind her, and Keiko happens to be possessed by the spirals just like the rest of the girls. And she wants to suck out Kirie's blood. And so Kirie is like on the floor, she's fumbling around, and she happens to hit the can of bug spray that Shuichi had left behind earlier. So she uses it and she starts spraying the pregnant women. And that causes all the pregnant women to flee, and Kirie is safe for the night. And then that's when we cut to Mrs. Saito, Shuichi's mom, and she's laying down when she feels a centipede climbing into her ear. She rips it out and she throws it on the floor, and it curls up into a spiral, and then it has the face of her husband. It basically says, I want to go into the spiral inside your ear. And of course, she starts freaking out. And then we cut to the next day where we have all the pregnant women. They all seem to be normal and they're all happy. And Kirie is trying to tell the doctors, like, hey, it's the pregnant women that are killing people. I saw it with my own eyes. And the doctors just write her off as being crazy. And I'm just kind of thinking, are there no cameras in this area? Maybe not. Maybe like they don't have the technology here. But also like, hey, you're missing a nurse. You have patients that are dead. And you have someone telling you, I saw who the killers were. Or is these pregnant women. The least you can do is maybe like look into it and not just completely write this person off. Like you would think, this seems kind of weird. Like they're pregnant women. Why would they go around murdering people and sucking their blood? But the least we can do is maybe look into it and see what's going on. But they don't. So whatever. And then that's when we have Shuichi talking his mom, and his mom's freaking out and has to find out if there's spirals inside people's ears. Tries to ask Shuichi, and Shuichi's like, no, there are no spirals in your ear. And then she rushes over to her doctor, and she notices that the chart that he had earlier is gone. That's why. And he just tells her, oh, well, that's just because that was an old chart. It was kind of out of date, so I just threw it away. And she says, are there any spirals in your ear? And he's like, no, there's no spirals in your ear. And she's like, oh, okay, thank God. The nurse takes her back to her room. And it turns out that basically Shuichi had informed the doctor about the spiral, how his mom might not take it correctly. So basically him and the doctor worked out that we will not tell her about the spirals in people's ears, and we'll just lie about it. But then as she's laying in bed, she sees that her IV bag is like spinning into a spiral, and it seems that there's something being sucked through the tube and it's about to get into her veins. So she like yanks the tube out, throws it on the floor, ends up knocking over her IV bag, and the cord turns into a spiral. And basically she starts hearing the voice of her husband saying, I want to get into the spiral in your ear. And so she believes that, okay, there is actually a spiral in my ear. So she looks in the cabinets and she finds a pair of scissors. Probably the same scissors she used to slice off her fingertips. Which just begs the question, why would you keep scissors around this woman when you already seen what she's done with them? She's already mutilated her body with scissors. Why would you keep them near her? Why would you keep any kind of sharp objects near this woman? Why do you not have this woman strapped to her bed, unable to move, if she's freaking out anytime she sees a spiral? And lately, this town has been covered in spirals. That's what I would do, but whatever, they decide not to. So she takes the scissors and she stabs them into her ear, and she kills herself. So now she is dead. Shuichi has lost his dad, and he's lost his mom. And so we cut to her body being cremated, and the smoke goes up into the sky and creates spirals. And this is one of the biggest complaints I have with the way this series is covered. Because if you remember earlier, the last episode, when Kirie was walking through the graveyard with her friend, they bring up the fact that cemetery is open now because they can't use the crematory, because every time when they cremate bodies, it creates giant spirals in the sky. It even happens to other cities only with residents from this town. So because of that, they've opened up the cemetery again, they buried bodies. Hence why Jack, from the Jack in the Box chapter in the last episode, gets buried rather than cremated. So now we're going back to cremation. It doesn't make any sense timeline-wise, because they've stopped cremation because of what happened with Mr. Saito, as well as other people. And of course, as Mrs. Saito gets cremated, she becomes a spiral in the sky as well. So this is why the pacing of this series is terrible, is because now you're contradicting something that happened in just the last episode. But she becomes a spiral, and I'm assuming she dips down into the dragonfly pond, and Kirie's dad basically is taking the same water from her ashes that he did from Mr. Saito. And then we cut back to the hospital again, where we have Shuichi feeding Kirie food. It's like this weird mushroom, and as soon as Kirie bites into it, she spits it out. She says that this is disgusting, like it tastes like blood. There's something wrong with it. And so they step out of the room, where they see a bunch of people talking about the new meal, which is mushrooms, and how they are basically gaga over it. Like they are just addicted to these new mushrooms that taste like blood. And so they decide to go check out on the babies, because apparently the pregnant women all gave birth at the same time. They go and check out the babies, and the babies are talking. The babies are able to carry out full conversation. And basically they're discussing with each other about how they want to go back inside their moms, how it was warmer and safer in there. And basically the babies, they start regrowing their umbilical cords. And then the umbilical cords at the end, it like kind of turns into this weird mushroom with a bunch of spirals. It basically looks a lot like the mushrooms that the hospital are feeding the other patients. So that's when they hear a scream, and they notice that sounds like Keiko. So they go to see what's going on, and they rush to where Keiko had delivered her baby. And they just see a bunch of the weird mushrooms all over the place. It's almost like this place is just growing these mushrooms. And that's when this doctor pops out. And he explains that he just keeps cutting the umbilical cords, but the babies want to go back inside their mom so much that they keep regrowing it. He doesn't know what to do with all these umbilical cords. Like the mushroom thing that's at the end of the umbilical cords is the placenta. They're regrowing the placenta. So he decides that he's going to cut off the placenta and then feed it to the patients as a new type of mushroom. So the patients are actually eating placenta. That's why it tastes like blood. Kirie decides to go into the back to check out on Keiko. And Keiko just looks really effed up. Like she's naked, she's on the table, and her belly just completely extended. And what happened is the doctor has cut her open so he can put her baby back inside her body, because the babies want to go back inside the womb. And he basically put the baby back inside and stapled it up. And she basically needs blood. Like she wants to feed some more. She's hungry. So the doctor grabs Kirie to feed her to Keiko. But as Keiko like unravels her tongue, and it basically looks like a mosquito. I forget what it's called, but the mosquito prick. For lack of a better word, that they use to, like, prick your skin so that they can suck the blood out. Kind of looks like that. And as it's going to stab Kirie, she moves at the last second and ends up stabbing into the doctor. And so the doctor dies as Keiko starts sucking out his blood until he becomes like sunken in, like his skin just kind of sunks into its body. We just cut to Kirie being discharged. She has healed from her wounds. And she's just like, okay, I just want to get the hell out of here. And I'm just like, this seems just very weird. Like, just her reaction. She literally just saw pregnant women killing people and sucking out their blood. She saw babies talking in full conversations. She's seen them growing their umbilical cords and placenta, and the hospital is feeding the placenta to other patients. And she just watched her cousin have her baby shoved back into her body before trying to attack her until she dodged, then attacked the doctor and killed the doctor. And she's just like, "Oh, yeah, I just want to go home." See, here's the biggest problem with the pacing is that in the manga, even though I personally have my problems with the way that Kirie acts in the manga, like my whole thing, I've mentioned this before and I still stand by it, is I think Uzumaki would have worked a lot better as an anthology where each chapter is a different protagonist and all the protagonists live within this town. And basically each chapter would be a different resident's story of how the spiral curse is affecting them. So you can still have all the same stories, but we're just not following the same characters. We're following just different characters within the same town. That way it would make sense why we don't have a main character who experiences all these in a matter of days and still refuses to leave. Kirie is the most passive protagonist ever because she's literally witnessed people dying, people trying to kill her, people getting murdered, body horror, weird transformations, all these weird, crazy stuff. And she's just like, yeah, let's go home. Yeah, let's go to school. All right, on to the next day. Really? None of this is phasing you? Like, you get phased in a moment, and then once the moment is past, you're completely back to normal again. This doesn't make any sense. This is why, again, like the anime makes it even worse because it just really showcases that. In the anime, you have one part of chapter 2, you have another part of chapter 4, then you have chapter 8, then you have chapter 12, then you have chapter 6, then you go back to chapter 2, and you have all these like mixed together. So it's just boom, 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 boom. One thing happens, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and there's no breathing room. Like you're not like just taking in what happened. Whereas in the manga, at least each event has its own chapter dedicated to just that event. So then you can see the entire thing play out and then you get the twist ending or whatever. Whereas here it's just like, all right, this happens, on to the next thing. Like in the last episode, we had Kirie have weird, crazy hair that spirals, almost tries to kill her. And then a boy that has a crush on her kills himself in front of her. And then she goes to school where she sees another one of her classmates turn into a snail. That snail mating with another snail that used to be her classmate, having babies. The teacher kills the babies. Then the teacher becomes a snail. And then this girl becomes jealous of her and tries to choke her with hair. And it's just like you have all these things happening, right? You have the couple turning into a giant snake. You have all this happening within a matter of like a day or two. And it's like none of this phases Kirie whatsoever. Like she's shocked in the moment, and then the moment passes, and then she's on to the next thing. She goes to school the next day, whatever. It's too much to be happening at once. It feels like the manga is more of a boil the frog, where you do it slowly. Whereas the anime, because of the pacing, you're basically throwing the frog straight into boiling water. Like there's no slow burn into boiling. For anyone who doesn't know the whole boiling the frog, if you throw a frog into boiling water immediately, it'll jump out. But if you throw it into cold water and then slowly start heating up the water until it slowly boils, the frog will stay inside the pot until it boils to death. It won't try to escape. But here, this is what I mean. Like, whereas at least in the manga, things are like slowly building up. Whereas here, it's almost like you just threw Kirie into the boiling pot. But she's discharged. They decide to go back to their house, Kirie's house, so that's, they can celebrate or whatever. And Shuichi's kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that because doesn't your dad make pottery by the pond? We shouldn't be near the pond because of what happened to my dad and my mom. But he decides to go anyways. So they're having a meal, and Shuichi's fine at first, but then he starts noticing like the weird spirals on the plate. And he starts hearing like what sounds like whispers, and he freaks out. And then the dad basically explains to Shuichi like, yeah, your dad was telling me about spirals and how like when I make pottery, it's almost like I'm making the spiral. Pottery is the greatest work of art when it comes to spirals. And so your dad was a smart man and all this stuff. And Shuichi's just like, there's something wrong with Kirie's dad. And so he decides to go investigate the furnace that Kirie's dad uses to make pots. and she sees that the dad's just staring into it and it's like spirals. And Shuichi's like, what's going on? Like, where are those voices coming from? And he looks into this furnace and he can like hear his mom and his dad begging for help. And he realizes that basically Kirie's dad has used the ashes of his parents to make the pottery. And so he smashes the furnace, which causes the workplace to light up on fire. And that seems to break the curse on Kirie's dad. He kind of like wakes up and he's no longer obsessed with spirals and making spiral pottery. And so that's basically the end of that chapter. And then we immediately jump to another chapter where we're basically dealing with a typhoon. And so in the manga, Shuichi is trying to go around telling people that there's going to be a typhoon happening and no one believes him. Here, we just immediately cut to a news report about how there's a typhoon that's going to hit the town. So we kind of cut all that set up. There's a huge storm. It's kind of blowing things all over the place. Shuichi like busts into Kirie's house and explains that the storm wants you. We got to get the hell out of here. And so he grabs her and rushes her out. And as she's running, she keeps hearing her name being whispered from the storm. Like the storm is calling out to her. And Shuichi basically explains that the storm is obsessed with you for some reason and it wants you. Like the typhoon wants to suck you up. We don't know why, but it is calling out to you. It's obsessed with you. So they're trying to hide. Eventually we get one point where some items fall onto Kirie and kind of trap her. And so Shuichi's trying to help her out. Passerby shows up and she decides to help Shuichi, lift up the debris so Kirie can come out. And as she's doing that, the storm sucks up the woman into the typhoon and then drops her like right in front of them and she's dead. And basically Shuichi is like, I think the storm mistook her for you. And so they're trying to hide out. Eventually they discover like a sewer access. And so they go into the sewers, but then they notice that the sewer water is turning into spirals and it turns into a whirlpool. And the storm sucks up the sewer water, sucking both Kirie and Shuichi with them, and it drops them at the pond, and Kirie's parents find them and take them in. Here's another like moment that was just crazy. As they're watching the news report on the storm, they cut to like one of the reporters on the scene, and they notice something behind her, and they turn and they look, and they see the body of Tsukino stuck to the telephone pole. However, for some reason, they completely butchered the animation here. So if anyone doesn't remember, Tsukino was the woman that became obsessed with Kirie and had the weird, crazy hair. Like her hair spiraled out as well, and she had the hair battle with Kirie. And then at the end of that episode, or at least the end of her story, the hair is draining her life force, and then it basically wraps itself around a telephone pole, and she just kind of stays there and dies. I had to go and explain more detail because the anime doesn't really share exactly what happened. But basically, it's sucking out her life force. She's too drained to do anything. She kind of hugs the telephone pole to kind of keep her up, and then she dies as the hair wraps around the pole. Here, we just have her body propped up against the pole, but the hair is not wrapped around the pole, which is kind of weird. Like you would think that the hair would still be wrapped, because how else is the body propped up? The body was propped up against the pole because the hair was wrapped around it. But now that the hair is not, how is the body propped up? And also, how is the body still here? Like, I think this was supposed to be like a little Easter egg. Or just, not even an Easter egg, but more like a callback. But the thing is that it's been weeks since Tsukino has been killed. Because you would think Kirie broke her arm and her leg after Tsukino died. And we saw Kirie in the hospital. We saw her with the cast. We saw pregnant women, and the pregnant women obviously had to be there long enough to give birth to a bunch of babies. And Kirie was there in the hospital long enough for her bones to heal and her cast to get removed. Because when we see her leave the hospital, she no longer has the cast. So she was there until her broken limbs healed. So are you telling me that this body was just chilling out on the street for weeks and weeks and no one did anything about it? They just left it there? How can no one notice, especially since Tsukino died surrounded by a bunch of people watching her? That was the whole point. The whole point was that the hair was causing people to look her way, and she was showering herself in this admiration. And so she refused to do anything until she eventually died. So she died with people watching her. And yet no one decided to like, hey, maybe we should tell someone that there's this dead woman on this telephone pole. Instead, they all just go back home and just leave the body there, and no one notices the body for weeks on end. That doesn't make any sense. This is why like the pacing of this anime series is just completely off. And then that's when we get the next chapter gets covered, where Kirie and Shuichi are in this like dilapidated house. Basically, it's a house that's strong enough to deal with the storm. And so they're going to be staying here for a while because their house got ruined. And they hear moaning. And basically, there's this character. His name is Wakabayashi. I'm just going to call him Waka to make it easier on me. But Waka is like the guy, I guess, who sold them the property or something. He basically explains that, oh yeah, your next door neighbor is an old woman and her son. Her son has some kind of weird condition, so he looks kind of weird. That's why like the rumor of a monster living next door to you started, is because he looks a little bit off. And he moans a lot. And people just started a rumor that he's a monster, so you don't have to worry about any of that. They're fine. They're not going to bother you or anything like that. And Waka turns out to be a creep because he's drilling holes in the walls so that he can stare at Kirie as she sits at the table with her family. And then eventually it's nighttime and they hear like a weird moaning. It almost sounds like a cry. And at first they're trying to tell Kirie that, oh, that must be the old lady's son next door. But Kirie is like, no, that doesn't sound like the son. That sounds like the old lady. It sounds like she's crying. So Kirie goes to check on the next door. Shuichi follows with her, and they see the old lady, and she basically explains that her son has died. And we don't see what happened to the son, but the son's dead. And so the next day, they cart out the body, and we just notice that there's like these weird, like almost spiral spikes protruding from parts of the body of the son. And Waka starts asking Kirie, like, hey, you saw the body, right? Did it look like? Did it look weird? And just once again being very creepy. And then he goes and decides to spy on Kirie some more through the hole in the wall. And he starts noticing that he's developing the spiked spirals. And then all of a sudden we see the spiked spirals start going through the wall and starts protruding into Kirie's family's house. And all of a sudden the wall breaks down and we see Waka, and he's like completely covered in these weird spirals. And he starts making a move towards Kirie. And this was just weirdly animated in the sense that everyone just stands around watching as this guy like goes to attack Kirie. And at one point, like Kirie is trying to escape the house and she trips and falls, and Waka is like on top of her. And Shuichi's right there, but he's not doing anything. Her dad and mom and brother are right there, and they don't do anything. They're just watching as this guy is like almost on top of their own daughter, their own girlfriend, their own sister. They don't do anything about it. But thankfully, the storm is still going. So before Waka can do anything to Kirie, a telephone pole that's been like ripped out of the ground flies and it impales Waka in the head and then just sends him flying, and he's dead. And then all of a sudden Jack appears out of nowhere, and I'm just like, what the really? You're bringing Jack here? This is like completely out of nowhere. So for anyone who doesn't remember, I actually spoiled what happened in the Jack story because I thought that they weren't going to cover it. So yeah, in the Jack in the Box, basically Jack is the guy who has a crush on Kirie. He keeps trying to confess to her. She keeps shooting him down because one, she finds him weird, and two, she already has a boyfriend that she's in love with. Jack's like, I'll prove that I love you. I'll throw myself in front of this car, and my love for you will keep me from being killed. Well, spoiler alert, he gets killed. And the toy that he gave to Kirie is like this Jack in the Box that pops out, and basically it kind of morphs into him and says, I'm going to kill you. Like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you. And so in the manga, Shuichi and Kirie go to the graveyard. They dig up his body so that they can destroy it before it comes back to harm Kirie. Only it reanimates and it starts trying to chase after them. But because it's a body that's rotting, the legs like fall off. And so there's like a spring inside the body. And Jack is basically using that to spring himself towards the two. But eventually he overshoots them, hits the ground, the spring comes out, and Jack is no more. He's no longer animated. But that whole part got cut out. Instead, in the anime, we just had Jack getting hit by the car, and that was it. We don't see the message about the Jack in the Box delivering the message to Kirie. We don't see them going to the cemetery and digging up the body or anything like that. Instead, we have Kirie almost get killed by Waka, and then immediately Jack appears with his legs gone, and he has like a spring that he's using to spring himself, and he's like trying to launch himself at Kirie, and he misses, and then the spring comes out, and the family just watches as this zombie just dies in front of them. And I'm just like, what did I just watch? this just came out of nowhere. I actually started laughing. And you shouldn't be laughing at a Junji Ito story. At least not a story based off of a chapter from Uzumaki. Junji Ito has some kind of dark humor in some of his stories. Uzumaki is not one of them, really. You shouldn't be laughing at this. But I was laughing because I'm like, this is so out of left field. This is so stupid. Why is Jack just appearing out of nowhere? That doesn't make any sense. And it's just, once again, it's this series just trying to take everything from Uzumaki and adapt it, but trying to shove it into 4 episodes. And it's like, there's like 16 or so, I forget how many chapters. There's a lot of chapters. There's no way you can fit everything into 4 episodes unless you're really just cramming things in and cutting things out. Like, and by cutting things out, it's not like, oh, we're going to cut out whole chapters. It says we're going to cut out pieces of chapters. And I'm just thinking, you know what? At this point, you might as well just cut out entire chapters and just leave them. Like, we didn't need to have the firing pin in this. We didn't need to have Jack. You could have completely cut out Jack from this story. You could have had this episode focused on just the mosquito, the babies, and the storm, and that's it. 3 chapters in a 20-something minute episode would have been just fine. But yeah, Jack appears out of nowhere and dies again. That's the end of that. So the episode is somewhat done. Like, we basically cut to credits. But then we get a post-credit scene. The post-credit scene is that the storm has passed and the family is looking at the body of Waka, which has like impaled itself on top of a roof. Basically, all the spikes have like kind of stuck to this roof. So they're just staring at his dead body. And they literally say, come on, let's go. Okay. And I'm just like, is nobody fazed by anything that happens to them? Like, I mean, just picture what happened to Kirie in this episode alone. She broke her arm and leg and got burnt from the aftermath of the last episode. She goes to the hospital. She sees patients being killed and drained of blood. She sees pregnant women killing the patients and drinking the blood. So now she finds out what's going on. She gets attacked by her own cousin who tries to suck out her blood. She sees babies talking. She sees babies growing their own umbilical cord and their own placenta because they crave being back inside their mom's bodies. She's seeing doctors cutting the placenta and then giving it to the other patients as food and then becoming addicted to this new food. She then sees that her cousin has had her baby shoved back into her body. Her cousin morphs into an almost mosquito-like creature to kill her, ends up accidentally killing the doctor. Then she goes back home, finds out her dad is acting weird, and has used the ashes of her boyfriend's dead parents to make pottery, to make plates that he's now using to feed the son. The son, her boyfriend, ends up destroying her dad's pottery to free the souls of his parents as well as other people that were cremated. Then a storm decides to become obsessed with her and try to kill her, but she survives that, but only after witnessing someone else get killed in her place. And then she sees a son with weird skin disease dying, only to then be attacked by another person with weird skin disease, only to survive that by a stroke of luck because he ends up getting impaled in the head because of the storm, only for the zombified body of the guy that was crushing on her to come back to life like a jack-in-a-box and try to kill her, only to miss and turn to dust in front of her. All of this happened in the matter of 1 episode. And we have no idea how much time exactly has passed between the episode because it's just, things just happen. There's no like set of time. We don't know if it's been a week, if it's been a month. We can assume it's been a few weeks between the mosquito incident and the typhoon, just because of the fact that Kirie had broken bones in the mosquito incident and those bones healed by the time the typhoon happened, but we have no idea exactly how much time has passed. But basically, in the matter of 1 20-minute episode, we had all these things happening to her, and her reaction to all of this is just, let's get out of here. Okay, really? You're not like, hey, let's pack our bags and get the F out of this town. I would have been gone immediately. Like, I wouldn't have taken this long. Like, as soon as I saw my boyfriend, like, if I'm in the role of Kirie, as soon as I saw my boyfriend's dead dad up in the sky, I would have been like, you know what, let's get the hell out of here. Shuichi, you had a great idea in the very beginning. Let's leave. Let's leave this town and never come back. But then more and more things are happening. And because of the pacing of this series, you get like 8 things happening to her in the span of a day, basically. And she just kind of takes it all. And it doesn't phase her. So that's why, like I say, that the pacing is just off. Especially here where you're bringing back Jack from the last episode out of nowhere. It's just like, okay, one thread just ended. And before we can even like have a breath, like, oh, Kirie was just attacked by this weird creep and he just got killed. Oh, thank God she's safe. Oh, no, never mind. Here comes Jack bouncing down the street to come launch himself at her. Like, what the what am I watching, man? This is terrible. Yeah, so basically, I looked up what the hell was going on. So it turns out that we have a completely different studio working on episodes 2, 3, and 4. So I covered this when I was doing episode 1, but episode 1 was directed by Hiroshi Nagahama, and it was done by Fugaku as the animation studio. I even remember joking about how it was weird that, like, it was an interesting coincidence that Fugaku is a character in Naruto, and the main character's name in Naruto is Naruto Uzumaki. So it was just, I kind of had a chuckle at that. But yeah, that studio's no longer working on this. They only covered episode 1. For some reason, there was like some kind of production issue, and so they basically had to like scrap everything and have like outsource all their stuff to a new studio to completely finish episodes 2, 3, and 4. And so episodes 2, 3, and 4, the director is Yuji Moriyama, and the animation studios, get this, Akatsuki, which, another Naruto reference. Akatsuki was the, I think it was like the Red Dawn. It was with Pain and Toby and Itachi and all those characters, like the villains that were going after the tailed beasts. Yeah, they share the same name. I just think it's kind of interesting that both studios are named after either a character or a group from Naruto, which shares the same last name as the name of the series, Uzumaki. But yeah, basically completely different director, completely different studio, and according to one of the executive producers, he explained that the drop in the quality is because they got screwed over during production. And basically they were told that they had a couple of options. One was to not finish the series, and so never air anything. Another option was to just finish episode 1 and just leave it as is. So we would just get episode 1 and no other episodes. Or just have all 4 episodes, quote unquote, warts and all. And so that's why we get episode 2 and 3 just being completely terrible when compared to episode 1. I will say that I still didn't mind episode 2. Like, I did bring up the visual quality dropping, like the animation quality, as well as not being a fan of the pacing. Overall, I still like enjoyed that episode for the most part. This episode's just completely, like, I like some of it. I like the parts with Kirie in the hospital. Like, I like the mosquito story, and I like the baby story, the umbilical cord story. Outside of that, I think the rest of the episode is just terrible. Like, just the constant mix and matching of the chapters makes for awful flow. Like, things are just happening for the sake of things happening. I would rather have it that they just give us episode 1 and that's it. If that was the option, episode 1 was perfect. Like, it was amazing. I didn't have any problems with episode 1 really at all. Episode 2, I had issues with it. I still enjoyed it, but it has its issues. It's flawed. Episode 3 is just, oh god, it's more bad than good. Like, episode 1 was just nothing but good. Episode 2 was some bad, but more good than bad. And episode 3 is more bad than good. And I have a feeling that episode 4 is just going to be completely terrible if this continues. I don't know what the production issue was, but I think it absolutely sucks. I would have wished that they just kept the same director and studio. And you know what? If they need more time, then just give them more time. Don't air out episode 1. Just postpone it again if you need to, so that we can just have a good adapted series. But it looks like once again, the Junji Ito adaptation curse has struck again. There has yet to be a really great Junji Ito adaptation. There have been stuff that have been pretty okay, but most of like his adaptations have just been terrible. And unfortunately, it looks like Uzumaki is going to continue that curse. Because yeah, this was not good. This was the episode that kind of broke me, I guess. Because like I said, I loved episode 1. I enjoyed episode 2. It wasn't as great as episode 1, but I still really enjoyed it. You know, faults and all. Episode 3, it It was bad, man. It was just bad. That's a shame. Yeah, we got one more episode to go. We'll see how bad that one's going to turn out. So, yeah, I feel like I've been rambling for too long. It's almost been an hour in time. It's almost been an hour in terms of recording. We'll see how long this video ends up being after I edit it. But there you go. There's episode 3. It's a huge step in the wrong direction. And I have no faith that this series is going to stick the landing, but we'll see. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with my critique of it or disagree? Did you enjoy what you saw? Not enjoy? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video, if anything. Hope you enjoyed this video that I made. And I hope to see you next time where we will conclude this series. Later. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, I still want to thank you for watching it this far. And I hope the next one is more to your liking. With that said, thank you once again, and I hope you guys and gals have a good one. Later.